She showed up at his door with suitcases. "I'm done pretending." The CEO said they laughed when she walked up the driveway. Brooke Harmon cupped her hand over Marcus Webb's ear and said, loud enough for everyone on the porch to hear, she actually showed up. With luggage. The Harrington Group's annual dinner was held at the Callaway Estate every October, a sprawling Georgian-style manor in Westport, Connecticut, where the wine cost more than a car payment and the guest list was curated like a museum collection. Caitlin Moore stood at the end of the stone driveway, holding 2 battered suitcases, wearing a blazer she'd ironed 3 times, and carrying a manila folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Brooke Harmon watched from the wraparound porch with the practiced amusement of someone who'd never been made to feel unwelcome in her life. Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed, already smirking. 3 other executives from Harrington's procurement division had turned to look. Someone said something about the service entrance and laughter followed it like smoke. Caitlin lifted her chin, walked toward the door. What Brooke Harmon didn't know was that those suitcases had nothing to do with an overnight stay. What Marcus Webb didn't know was that the manila folder Caitlin was holding contained documents that would end his career before dessert was served. What none of them knew was that the man who'd quietly opened the front door, James Callaway, their company's founder and majority shareholder, the one they all assumed was a reclusive eccentric who let his estate be used for parties, had been waiting 3 months for this exact moment. By the time coffee was poured, Brooke would be silent for the first time anyone could remember. Marcus would be making phone calls he didn't want to make, and Caitlin Moore, who had driven 4 hours with everything she owned in those 2 suitcases because she had nowhere else to go, would be sitting in a leather chair in the study of the most powerful man in the room, listening to him say, "I'm done pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like." 18 hours earlier, Caitlin had been fired. She found out at 9:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, standing in the hallway outside the procurement conference room with a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. Marcus Webb's assistant had slid an envelope under her office door. Inside, a termination letter, 2 weeks of severance, and a typed note that said her access card would be deactivated by noon. No meeting. No warning. No explanation beyond restructuring. She'd gone back to her desk and sat very still for a long time. Caitlin was 31. She'd been at the Harrington Group for 4 years, working her way from junior analyst to the only person in her department who could read a full procurement audit without referring to a guide. She knew every vendor contract the company had signed since 2019. She knew which ones were real and which ones weren't. That last part was the problem. 6 weeks ago, she'd flagged something in the quarterly vendor review. 2 shell companies, Pelham Consulting and Westgate Advisors, had been invoicing the company for services that, as far as she could tell, didn't exist. Combined, $1.2 million over 18 months. Both entities traced back to a holding company in Delaware. The same holding company Marcus Webb's wife had incorporated 3 years prior. Caitlin had brought it to her supervisor. Her supervisor had gone pale, told her to keep it quiet, and then stopped making eye contact with her in the hallways. 2 weeks later, her quarterly review, previously glowing, had suddenly been marked below expectations. And now, a termination letter. She'd printed everything before turning in her keycard. Every invoice, every vendor registration, every corporate filing she could access. 12 pages. Inside the manila folder now pressed against her chest. The problem was, she didn't know what to do with it. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have savings past next month's rent. She'd driven to her sister's in Hartford, but her sister had 4 kids and a 2-bedroom apartment, and already looked exhausted. She'd sat in the parking lot of a diner for an hour. folder on the passenger seat, trying to think. Then she'd remembered the dinner. She'd been invited weeks ago, a standard Harrington Group client event held annually at the Callaway estate. The invitation was still in her glove compartment. She hadn't planned on going. She wasn't technically an employee anymore. But she wasn't not invited either. She looked at her 2 suitcases in the back seat. She looked at the folder. She started the car. The porch had cleared by the time she reached the door, but she could still hear Brooke Harmon's voice somewhere to the left, sharp and carrying, the way it always was at company events. "I have no idea who invited her," she was saying. "Human Resources must have had a mailing list error." Caitlin didn't stop walking. The front hallway of the Callaway estate was 2 stories high and smelled like old wood and something floral she couldn't name. A hired attendant took her blazer without asking for her name. She kept the folder. The dinner was arranged in the formal dining room, 20 people around a single long table, crystal and silver laid out with the kind of precision that suggested someone had measured the spacing. Caitlin's name was on a place card near the end, which she found both insulting and clarifying. She sat down, poured herself water, opened the folder once just to check it was all there, then closed it again. "That looks serious." The voice came from the chair to her left. The man was in his mid-50s, in a plain, dark suit, with the kind of face that had probably looked tired for years and had simply made peace with it. He wasn't anyone she recognized from the company. He wasn't wearing a name badge. "It is," she said. "Are you going to do something with it?" She looked at him. "I'm still deciding." He nodded, like that was a reasonable answer to a question he hadn't really asked. "I find that honesty is usually the right call, even when it's inconvenient." He offered his hand. "James." She shook it. "Caitlin." He didn't offer a last name, neither did she. Dinner was served. Brooke Harmon had arranged herself at the center of the table, the gravitational pull of the room, as always. She was saying something about the Q4 results, her voice calibrated for an audience larger than just Marcus, who sat beside her with the posture of a man who'd long since stopped worrying about anything. Caitlin watched them, thought about the invoices, thought about the folder. James, the man to her left, was quiet through the first course. When the second arrived, he said, without looking up from his plate, "You drove here. From a while away. 4 hours. With luggage. I don't have anywhere else to go tonight." She said it plainly, without apology. "And I needed to be here." He set down his fork, looked at her directly for the first time. The suitcases were a choice then, not an accident. Everything was a choice. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. What Caitlin didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that James Callaway had been watching the Harrington Group's procurement division for 8 weeks. His estate manager had flagged the vendor irregularities to him months ago through a routine audit of their partnership account. He'd been waiting to see who, if anyone inside the company, would come forward. He'd almost given up. She'd find out what that meant very soon. They all would. Halfway through the main course, Marcus Webb stood to make a toast. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd been toasted back often enough to believe it was simply the natural order of things. He talked about growth, about the company's vision, about the Harrington Group's commitment to ethical partnerships and long-term value. His voice never wavered. His smile never flickered. Caitlin's hand tightened around the folder under the table. Brooke raised her glass, to Marcus, and to the team that makes it all possible. Everyone drank. Caitlin set her glass down without touching it. Brooke noticed. smiled across the table. "Caitlin, I have to say, I didn't expect to see you this evening, given recent developments." The table quieted slightly. Not all the way, just enough to indicate that people were listening without admitting it. "I was invited," Caitlin said. "Of course." Brooke's smile widened. "It just must be uncomfortable. For you." She tilted her head. "Starting over can be hard, especially at your age. With so little cushion." 3 people at the table looked away. 2 didn't bother to. Caitlin didn't answer right away. She let the silence sit for just long enough to become noticeable. "I'm not starting over," she said finally. "I'm finishing something." Brooke blinked. "Sorry?" "I said I'm finishing something." She placed the manila folder on the table. "I drove 4 hours tonight because I needed to hand this to someone with the authority to act on it." She looked at James beside her. "I thought I was going to have to find the right person, but I think I already did." James Calloway set down his wine glass. He looked at the folder. At Caitlin. At Marcus Webb, whose color had begun to change in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature. "May I?" James asked. "Yes." He opened it. Read the first page. Then the second. His expression didn't shift. It was the same quiet face it had been all evening, the one that had made peace with looking tired. But his stillness changed quality. It became the stillness of someone paying very close attention. Marcus cleared his throat. "I'm not sure this is the appropriate, Marcus." James didn't raise his voice. Didn't look up. Just said the name once, and Marcus went silent like a light switching off. The table had gone entirely quiet now. 20 people who had been performing the choreography of a dinner party had stopped performing it. James finished reading the last page, closed the folder, set it precisely in front of him. "Brooke," he said, "would you excuse us for a moment? I need the room." Brooke Harmon's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry? I need the room." He looked at her steadily. "You, Marcus, and the procurement team. Please wait in the drawing room. Gerald will show you." An estate staff member appeared instantly at the doorway, as if summoned. Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Marcus, who was looking at the table. She stood, her chair scraped. Marcus followed without speaking. The 3 Harrington procurement executives filed out after them, not making eye contact with anyone. The dining room doors closed. 17 people remained at the table, including Caitlin Moore, who had stopped breathing quite normally. James Calloway looked at her. "I'm James Calloway," he said. "I own this estate, yes. I also own a 43% stake in the Harrington Group, which makes me its majority shareholder. I've been looking at these vendor contracts for 8 weeks." He paused. "You flagged them internally 6 weeks ago." "Yes, and were terminated as a result." "Yes." He nodded once. "I owe you an apology for how long this took." He looked at the folder again. "And I have a phone call to make. Tonight." He excused himself to the study. Caitlin sat at the table with 16 strangers and a room that had gone from loud to absolutely motionless. Someone eventually poured more wine. A few people started quiet conversations in low voices. No one spoke to her directly, but 2 people. A woman named Patricia from the legal department, and a man she'd never met, named Owen, who turned out to be an outside auditor, moved their chairs subtly closer and asked, in the careful way of people who wanted to be on the right side of something without committing yet, whether she was all right. "I'm fine," she said, and meant it, for the first time in about 8 weeks. Through the tall windows, She could see part of the driveway where she'd parked. The suitcases were still in the back seat of her car. She'd packed them that morning, not with any plan in mind exactly, more as an acknowledgement that the chapter she'd been living was over, and whatever came next would have to be started from scratch. 2 bags, one of clothes, one of the things that mattered. Her mother's wooden box, her daughter's drawings. The folder. The folder was now on the table in front of the most powerful man in the company. She thought about the moment she'd printed those documents, standing at the communal printer at 11:47 p.m. The night before her last day, listening to the machine work through 12 pages, thinking, either this matters to someone or it doesn't. Either way, I did what I was supposed to do. James Calloway came back into the dining room 32 minutes later. He looked at her, pulled out his chair, sat down. "The board chair has been reached," he said quietly. "Marcus Webb's employment has been suspended pending investigation. Brooke Harmon's committee access has been revoked. An emergency audit has been initiated." He folded his hands on the table. "This will likely take several months to fully resolve. You'll be contacted by the company's legal counsel within 48 hours. You are not required to speak to them without your own representation." "I don't have," she started. "You'll be provided access to independent counsel at the company's expense. That's non-negotiable and already arranged." He looked at her directly. "The termination will be reversed, effective immediately, with back pay. Though given what you've done, I imagine your relationship with the Harrington Group in its current form is finished regardless." "Yes," she said. "It is." "Good," he said it simply, like he'd expected that too. "Are you hungry?" "I'm told the second course never actually made it out of the kitchen." She blinked, laughed, a short, exhausted sound. "I didn't eat this morning." He signaled the kitchen. They ate eventually. The dinner resumed around them in a stranger, quieter key. Some people left early, some stayed. Nobody mentioned Marcus or Brooke by name for the rest of the evening, which Caitlin found oddly respectful. James Calloway didn't perform. He didn't explain himself or elaborate on who he was. He asked questions that turned out to be the kind a person asks when they actually want to know the answer. How long she'd been in procurement, what had drawn her to audit work, whether she had a daughter. He'd noticed the drawings in the folder's back pocket, done in crayon on graph paper. "Nora," Caitlin said. "She's 9. What does she like?" "Maps. She draws maps of everywhere we've ever lived. We've moved 4 times. She has a map for each place." He was quiet for a moment. "My daughter made weather reports. Every morning until she was 12. Barometric pressure and everything. Still don't know where she learned what barometric pressure meant." Caitlin smiled. "Where is she now?" "Boston. Climate research." Something in his face warmed, briefly and privately. She probably saw this coming. The mess at Harrington. "She told me last spring I needed to clean house." He picked up his water glass. "I should have listened sooner." "You acted when you had the evidence." "Someone brought me the evidence," he said. "That's not the same thing as finding it yourself." She looked at him. "You could have acted without me." "I could have." He set the glass down. "But then you would have been fired for nothing. And that seemed like the wrong outcome." By 11 o'clock, most guests had gone home. The estate staff moved quietly through the rooms, collecting glasses, returning the house to its own quiet order. Caitlin sat in the study. James had offered it when she'd mentioned she didn't have a hotel. With her blazer back on and her folder in her bag and the suitcases brought in from the car, standing against the bookshelves like they were waiting for instructions. James stood in the doorway. "There's a guest room," he said. "3rd floor, end of the hall. It's nothing formal. You don't have to. You drove 4 hours. You have nowhere to go tonight, and you did something that cost you quite a bit. He said it without sentiment, just as a list of facts. The guest room is there. That's all. She looked at him. Why does this feel like you're about to tell me something? He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that had weight in it. I've been running this estate and this company in the background for 12 years, he said. My name is on the ownership documents and almost nowhere else. People assume the Callaways are old money who lease their manor for parties. I let them assume it. He looked at the bookshelves, the 2 suitcases, the folders sitting on the chair. It stops working. Pretending that none of it is yours, pretending you're not watching, or that you don't care, or that the distance is comfortable. He looked back at her. You walked up this driveway with 2 suitcases and a folder full of evidence, and you didn't stop when they laughed. I think that's the most honest thing I've seen in a very long time. Caitlin was quiet for a moment. I didn't have a plan, she said. I just had the folder and nowhere else to go. That's still a choice. Is it? Everything was a choice, he said. Her own words from dinner. You said so yourself. She looked at him. Something settled in her chest that had been very unsettled for a very long time. I'm done pretending, James Calloway said, that this company runs itself, that I'm not involved, that watching from the edge is the same as being responsible. He said it simply, without drama. Starting tomorrow, I'm not the quiet landlord. I'm the majority shareholder, and I'm going to act like it. He paused, and I thought you should know that. Before the morning. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. He left her to the study and the quiet and the suitcases against the bookshelves. Outside, the estate grounds were dark and still. She could hear a clock somewhere down the hall. She pulled out the folder, looked at the 12 pages she'd risked everything to print, set them on the desk. Then she got out Nora's most recent map, the one of the apartment they'd just left. Done in green crayon with little labels for everything. Mom's coffee spot. My window. The park we walked to on Sundays. She set it beside the folder. For a while she just sat there, in the study of the Calloway estate, and let the evening be what it was. But the consequences were only beginning. By Thursday morning, 3 things would happen. Marcus Webb's suspension would become a termination, following an emergency board vote that took 11 minutes and required no debate. Brooke Harmon's consulting arrangement, a $180,000 annual retainer she'd held for 4 years, would be quietly and permanently ended. Effective immediately, with a letter noting that the decision was final and non-negotiable, and the board of the Harrington Group would formally request that James Calloway step into an active executive role for the first time in 12 years. He would say yes. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb's name was removed from the building directory. The sign had been up so long, there was a pale rectangle where it used to be. Nobody painted over it immediately. It just sat there for a few days, visible to anyone who walked past. A rectangle of slightly cleaner wall where something had been taken down. His largest client, a logistics firm he'd cultivated for 3 years, had terminated the relationship within 48 hours of the news becoming public. Word moves fast in those circles. Nobody wanted to be the name on the invoice next to his. Brooke Harmon tried calling 3 people from her committee in the first week. 2 didn't return the calls. The third called back to say she was stepping back from everything right now. Brooke sent 1 email to Caitlin, a careful, lawyered thing that started with "I want to express my regret." Caitlin read it once, did not respond. Some distances, once made, don't close. Caitlin got an apartment in Westport. Small, a 1-bedroom with a second room just large enough for Nora's desk and her maps. The commute was short. The school was good. Nora, who handled change the way certain children do, by immediately finding the thing that interested her most about it, declared the new town mappable, and began a fresh sheet of graph paper the day they moved in. Caitlin's name badge at Harrington now read, Director of Compliance, Office of the Executive Chair. A new role, one that hadn't existed before November. She'd been asked during the interim restructuring whether she wanted her old position back. She'd said no. The person who asked hadn't seemed surprised. The work was harder, more visible. She was in rooms now where she'd previously only seen the minutes. She was the one writing the minutes. It suited her. James Calloway ate lunch at his desk most days, which his assistant viewed as a personal failure she was working to correct. On the third Friday of December, she left a sticky note on his keyboard, dining room. Noon, non-negotiable. C was Caitlin. He went. Nora had drawn a map of the estate. All 5 floors, all 14 rooms with labels, James's study. The kitchen, the room with all the books. She'd left it on his desk the previous weekend when she and Caitlin had come for what had become, without any formal announcement, a Sunday habit. He'd framed it. It was the only thing on the wall beside the window. Caitlin saw it when she walked in at noon on Friday, with a folder in one hand and a sandwich in the other, and she stopped. He looked up from his desk. "You framed it," she said. "It's accurate," he said. "Best cartography I've seen in years." She sat down in the chair across from him. Set the sandwich on the desk, set the folder beside it. "What's that?" he asked. "Not work." He raised an eyebrow. "Nora wants to go to the coast this weekend. Maine, maybe. She has a list of towns she wants to map." Caitlin opened the folder, not documents this time, but printed pages from a travel website, annotated in pencil. She also said, and I'm quoting, "James probably knows the good places, because he knows everything." He looked at the pages, looked at her. "She's not wrong," he said. Caitlin smiled. The kind of smile that arrived without effort, which was how she knew it was real. Outside, the December light came through the study windows at a low angle, stretching across the desk, across the framed map of all 14 rooms, across the annotated printouts in the folder that this time held nothing difficult. Just plans. Just a weekend. Just what came next. Neither of them announced it out loud. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Nora started a new page of graph paper. At the top, in careful block letters, she wrote, "Map of James's house." She drew the kitchen first, labeled it, "Best part." And she wasn't wrong.